Hello, friends, and welcome to Advent at St. Andrew. It is my privilege to welcome you here today from the beautiful St. Andrew Sanctuary. I'm grateful, as always, to share this sacred online space with you, where we are all invited, included, and valued as vital and beloved members of our broader worshiping community. The Advent and Christmas season is full of anticipation, waiting for the arrival or advent of Jesus, the long-awaited Messiah. It's also a time of reflection in our personal lives, with our families, and as we examine our faith. The traditional themes of hope, peace, joy, and love guide our path to walk through this season with compassion and kindness for ourselves and for each other. This year's St. Andrew Advent giveaway is a special weekly download featuring original prayers, scripture readings, and musical offerings reflective of the Advent season, all of which are read by members of the St. Andrew community. This weekly devotional will immerse you in the unique themes of Advent and prepare your heart and mind for the wonder and mystery of Christmas. You can listen by going to gostandrew.com/devotional or through the new St. Andrew app, where the episodes will automatically appear each Saturday. We hope that you can join us in the many ways we will connect, whether in joy or with the sadness that this time can bring, and build community with one another and our neighbors throughout this season. St. Andrew is proud to be an open, affirming, inclusive congregation that welcomes all people into the full life and communion of our church. This includes saints and sinners, believers and skeptics, the lost and the found, the wanderers and the wanderers, families of all shapes and sizes, and people from every point along life's journey. No matter who you are or where you've been, no matter what you believe or even if you believe anything at all, you are welcome here and you belong here. If you have any questions about our church, prayer requests for our care team, or if you would like to get in touch with a member of our pastoral team or staff, please email info@gostandrew.com. If you would like to explore deeper engagement with the St. Andrew community through our many classes, group life gatherings, and service opportunities, you can email us directly at connect@gostandrew.com. We'd love to hear from you. Just as a reminder, our full Sunday morning worship services, complete with prayer, music, announcements, liturgy, ministry spotlights, and the sermon, are live streamed on our YouTube page each week and permanently archived for viewing anytime. Lastly, to contribute a financial gift to the work and ministry of St. Andrew, you can always visit gostandrew.com/give or text St. Andrew to 28950. And now, let's listen together to this week's scripture and sermon.
A reading from the book of Isaiah, chapter 60. Arise, shine, your light has come. The Lord's glory has shone upon you. Though darkness covers the earth and gloom the nations, the Lord will shine upon you. God's glory will appear over you. Nations will come to your light and kings to your dawning radiance. Lift up your eyes and look all around. They are all gathered. They have come to you. Your sons will come from far away and your daughters on caregivers' hips. Then you will see and be radiant. Your heart will tremble and open wide. Your gates will be open continually. Day and night they won't close, to bring to you the wealth of nations and their kings led in procession. Violence will no longer resound throughout your land, nor devastation or destruction within your borders. You will call your walls salvation and your gates praise. The sun will no longer be your light by day, nor will the moon shine for illumination by night. The Lord will be your everlasting light. Your God will be your glory.
Are you going home for Christmas? It's the one question we tend to ask this time of year. Are you going home for Christmas? Have you ever noticed how such a simple, seemingly harmless question can, in certain moments, just bring tears to your eyes? Are you going home for Christmas? Maybe it's such a tender question because it calls us to ponder where home really is for us. Are we home already, right here in this moment? Or do we feel far from home and Are we desperately longing to get back? To be human is to live with a certain degree of homesickness. It's a universal human condition that actually begins at the very moment of our birth, when sadly but unavoidably we are physically evicted by our maternal landlord from the comfort and safety of our only home that we've ever known, and the one home we thought we'd never have to leave. Consider that for a moment. Our first human experience in the outside world is one of the most traumatic we will ever endure, the experience of leaving home. And from that moment on, wherever we are in the world, in whatever moment we happen to be in, we will all in some way feel the endless ache of longing for home. We feel this homesickness in a variety of ways as humans. For some of us, it's the deep longing for an actual physical place that feels or once felt like home to us. Maybe it's the place we came from, or the place that felt most like home for a time, or the place we wish we'd never left. With this kind of homesickness, we might say things like, I just don't feel at home here. Or, I want to go back to where my people are. Or, I miss the land, the seasons, the smells, the sounds. Homesickness for a lot of people is the real longing for a physical place. Another kind of homesickness is the longing to be at home with ourselves. It's longing for inner peace, or that sense that we are really at home in our own bodies. The feeling that we truly know and accept ourselves as we are. When we suffer from this kind of homesickness, we might say things like, I'm just not at home in my own skin sometimes. Or I'm feeling beside myself. Or I can't be myself because others expect me to be someone else. This kind of homesickness is the longing for inner peace that comes only when we finally befriend our true self, who, in our pursuit of success or achievement, can so easily become a stranger to us. And this homesickness is so widespread in the modern world today that it's the primary source of our anxiety and our unhappiness as humans. But there's one more kind of homesickness we're apt to experience as humans, and that's the longing for the past. The ancient Greeks called it nostalgia, which means something like to long to go back to the start. It's the longing for what used to be. Nostalgia isn't always bad. It can take us on this wonderful trip down memory lane, where we can remember the good times and the people who've come and gone, the rituals and customs that shaped us, the way things used to be before the world or before our lives somehow changed. Nostalgia is a lot like walking down Main Street, USA at Disneyland, where everything seems so quaint and coiffed and in its proper turn of the century small town place. But it's easy to forget that Main Street, USA is not real. Disney calls it a themed land for a reason. And that theme is only alluring because the unfavorable memories and details have all been edited out. And that's the real problem with nostalgia. Remembering the good times can easily turn into a desire to relive the good times, or worse, to return to the good times forever. This happens whenever our current circumstances do not live up to the fantasy or the illusion that we've made of our past. It's like having to listen to someone go on and on for the umpteenth time about that game-winning touchdown they scored back in high school 45 years ago. It's like listening to that guy who had to walk to and from school every day in the snow, uphill both ways, and never complained once. And that's the real problem with kids today. What makes nostalgia so dangerous is that it often turns the past into something bigger and more wonderful and more desirable than it actually ever was. Or it turns it into something far better than what actually could be today. Do any of these forms of homesickness describe your experience? The longing for a place, or the longing for inner peace, or the longing for the past. In the Bible, this experience of homesickness is called exile. It's the longing for a place, a longing for peace. It's the longing for a return to the past. In the Bible, it's both a personal and a collective experience. It's felt by individuals and entire nations. Whenever they have that sense of not being where they know they belong, or that sense of not knowing who they are now after some disappointment or tragedy, or that sense of not knowing what the future might now hold for them. Homesickness. The Bible calls it exile, and the Bible reminds us that it comes to all of us, and that when it comes, it brings both grief and grace. It brings grief because we know we've been displaced, and we know we can't go back. But it brings grace too, because if we really are to survive in this new reality, we must choose to make a home in the place and time we're now in. It's something like what Nicholas Wolterstorff described after losing his son in a mountain climbing accident. Wolterstorff is an American philosopher. He taught for many years at Yale. After the death of his son Eric, he wrote a book about his experience titled Lament for a Son. And he said that after his son's death, everything he once knew and believed about God suddenly changed. It wasn't that he didn't believe anymore, it's that his old and familiar beliefs about God had changed. Before the accident, he'd always known God as what he described as this indescribable majesty and graciousness and goodness. The one, he said, who blesses. But after losing his son, Wolterstorff said everything was different. Who is this God looming over me? Majesty? I see no majesty. Grace? Can this be grace? I see nothing at all, he said. Dark clouds hide the face of God. Do you hear the homesickness, the exile in that lament? Over time, Wolterstorff said that the clouds began to lift, and what he saw then were tears. Quote, he says, a weeping God, suffering over my suffering. He said he had never realized that if God really loves this world, God suffers too. Wolterstorff said he thoughtlessly supposed that God loved without suffering. He says, quote, I knew that divine love was the key, but I had not realized that the love that is the key is suffering love. Wolterstorff couldn't go back to his old beliefs. And through his experience of exile, he eventually found a new home that caused him to see God differently. And sometimes from the experience of exile, we gain a whole new understanding of life. We encounter God in a whole new way, and it happened that way for the Jews after their exile. In our reading from Isaiah today, the people of Israel have just returned from exile in Babylon. 70 years earlier, the armies of Babylon conquered Israel and carried all their politicians and businessmen and priests back to Babylon to live in exile. For 70 years, the Jews longed to return to Jerusalem, the place they called home. They longed for the rituals and traditions that gave them their inner peace, and they longed for the past, the good old days. They dreamed of the day when everything would be just like they remembered it. It was a dark and hopeless time for the Jews. The 137th Psalm was written during the time of exile, and it captures their homesickness with poignant clarity. It says, alongside Babylon's streams, we sat on the banks. We cried and cried, remembering the good old days in Zion. Alongside the quaking aspens, we stacked our unplayed harps, because how could we ever sing God's song in this wasteland? Homesickness. But then this amazing thing happens. The Persian Empire defeats the Babylonians. And Cyrus, the Persian leader, eventually orders the Jews to return home to Jerusalem. After 70 years in exile, they're finally going home. And on their long journey home, they sing songs about Jerusalem, and they tell stories to their children who were born in Babylon, who've never even seen Jerusalem. They tell stories about the beautiful city, the strong walls and gates, the temple built by King Solomon himself. But when they finally arrive home, what they find is complete desolation. Everything has been reduced to rubble. The walls, the beautiful buildings, even the temple, it all lies in ruins. And they should have expected this, but they didn't. And it was devastating. Maybe it was a little bit like those heartbreaking videos you see on TV today. Those videos of families in Gaza weeping as they sift through the rubble and ashes, searching for their belongings and heirlooms and photographs, any reminder of who they once were or who they are. And so the Jews wept. Nothing will ever be the same again, they said. We will never be the same again, they said. And it's in this dark moment of grief that the prophet Isaiah shows up, and it's like he pulls the lever on the divine transformer, and light suddenly floods the darkness. And he says, "Arise, shine, for your light has come." Isaiah tells them that God has finally found them. While they were suffering in Babylon, God was suffering too. It was a suffering love. And while they were homesick, God was heartsick. "Arise, shine, for your light has come," he says. While you were longing for home all these years, God had been longing for you. And now your longing for God has met God's longing for you. And you're finally home. But here's the thing, it didn't look or feel like home at the time. Not yet. All that rubble, all that destruction, it seemed worse than exile itself. And that's why Isaiah says, "Arise." He says to them, get up and get to work and rebuild the ruins, because a true home is not some distant place out there or some distant time back then. A true home is the one we are building in the time and place we are in right now. Isn't that, in the end, the cure for our homesickness? How do we know we're really home? How do we find peace within ourselves? How can we ever embrace a future that doesn't require us to romanticize the past? We rise up with faith in the very time and place we are in. We sift through whatever rubble we're standing in, and we begin to rebuild the ruins in the light of God's suffering love for us. Home is not somewhere else. Home is where we are. And home is where our longing meets God's possibilities to build something new. That's the beautiful thing about Isaiah's message. He says, you'll build a new home, but it can't be like the home you once knew. Why? Because in old Jerusalem, back in the day, you trampled the poor. In the so-called good old days, your leaders were actually corrupt. Your neighbors were actually thieves. Your politicians took bribes. Your priests told lies. And your orphans and widows suffered. Whether you're rebuilding Jerusalem or just rebuilding your own life after a crisis, your true home is not out there. And it's not back there. Your true home is right here. Even Jesus said the kingdom of God is within you, which means you won't find your true home in yesterday, and you won't find it in Tomorrowland. You'll find it when you wake up to the world that you're living in, and you rebuild the ruins. Do you remember the ending to The Wizard of Oz? There's no better story about losing home and finding home again. Dorothy's carried away from her home in Kansas by a tornado. She must find her way back home, and she endures wicked witches and munchkins and winkies and all kinds of trials with the help of 3 generous and imperfect friends. But it's not until she meets up with Glinda, the good witch of the north, that she discovers that all she has to do is wake up to be at home again. What does she say? You've always had the power, dear. You just had to learn it for yourself. And isn't it a gift to finally wake up where we are and to find ourselves saying, there's no place like home? That's Isaiah's message. It's time for you to wake up now. It's time for you to rise up and make this place your home. It's time for you to choose to be a light in the very place you are in. Isaiah calls us to partner with God in the daring work of rebuilding and restoring and repairing our lives or our world. He speaks to those of us who are somewhere between exile and home, that in-between space, when the old has passed away and the not yet hasn't yet come. A time of waiting and working, which is what the season of Advent is all about. Waiting and working for the new. Maybe you find yourself in one of those in-between seasons when the old has passed away and the new you has yet to come into view. Maybe you find yourself looking at the world and realizing that there's a better way to live. There's a better way to live with each other than the violence and fear and suspicion that captures our world today. Wherever you are, Isaiah says this. Get out of bed, people. Wake up and put your face in the sunlight. God's bright glory has risen for you. Our takeaways for today: to be human is to always long for home. The home God calls us to is not in some other place or time, but in the here and now. Our true home is the one we are building in the place and time we are in.